Okay, so this last ecology video is going to be over succession. So we're going to start first with forest succession. That would be the one you're probably the most familiar with from middle school, starting with the barren rock down here, working our way this way until we reach the the climax community, or the stable community that shouldn't really change unless there is some kind of climate change or disaster or intervention. Okay, so we're going to look first at what's called primary succession. Okay, so primary succession is when there is essentially new land. Okay, it's rocky, it's brand new, so there's new land, okay, and we're trying to convert that new land into a stable community. Okay, so you can see here some of the reasons why we would have this primary succession occurring. Okay, so volcano eruptions, which would leave behind rocky, barren land that basically you're starting from scratch. There's no dirt, there's no fertile soil. Same with glaciers receding, glacier recession, or when it recedes and it backs up. You can see the line here of where the glacier used to be, okay, versus where it is now. And so this leaves behind this rocky, barren land that doesn't have any dirt, doesn't have any soil. And basically soil needs to be created so that the community there, especially of plants, can thrive so that it can bring in animals. So our first species to come into the community, the first to arrive, these are what are called our pioneer species. And so these are essentially our species that can survive on barren rock. These are very harsh conditions. You can see here there's no dirt, there's no soil here. That glacier's eroded, the volcanoes erupted, and all that we have left is rock. And so the first species to come in then are called the lichen. So they're an example of a primary species. And so that's what we have over here is lichen. You can see this like green stuff growing on the rock. Okay, that's an example of a lichen down here. And so lichen is the result of a mutualistic relationship. Remember, in mutualism, they both are getting a benefit. And this relationship here is between fungi and algae. And so what we have here is a photosynthetic algae. So the algae is able to produce food for everybody, because remember, fungus is a heterotroph. So the algae is photosynthetic and produces food for everyone. The fungus helps absorb water and minerals and essentially provides a shelter for the algae. You can see that happening here. That's providing the shelter for the algae there. So they're mutualistic. They're both getting a benefit here, and they're able to grow on these rocks. And over time, as erosion is occurring, okay, chemical erosion, biological, physical, it doesn't matter, erosion in general, as erosion is occurring and these rocks get broken down, those lichen are killed and they are going to be decomposed. And remember, when things get decomposed, that's releasing nutrients back into the soil. So this starts to create a soil by the decomposition of these lichen. As these lichen decompose and they are increasing the nutrients in the soil, that's going to lead to annuals being able to come in. And so annuals are usually flowering plants. Okay? They only live 1 year. So they germinate, they grow, they flower, and they die, all within that 1 year. And so as these annuals decompose, again, they're going to continue to add nutrients to the soil. So after the annuals, we have the arrival of the perennials. And perennials are plants that are going to live longer than 2 years. Okay, so they're not going to die quite as quickly, so they're not going to add their nutrients to the soil quite as quickly. Okay, they can grow a little bit larger, they last a little bit longer, but they require more nutrients. The larger these plants get, the more nutrients, the more fertile the soil needs to be. So essentially, the more dead organic material needs to be in the soil. So if we take a look back at our timeline here, where we're at, we had the barren rock here at the very beginning. Okay, and then here came the lichen, which were our pioneers. Wow. Let's try that again. So here come the lichen, which are our pioneer species there. Okay, then we've got our annuals moving in as those lichen are decomposed and some soil is developing, becoming a little bit more nutrient rich, followed by the perennials. That'll last a little bit longer than 2 years. And you notice as you continue to the right on this timeline, these plants are getting larger and larger and larger. After the perennials that have come in then, we're going to move to shrubs, which will be a little bit larger, usually vascular in nature. Ferns and a lot of those shrubs are going to be, ferns, a lot of those perennials may be avascular. So these are going to have xylem and phloem for transport. They're going to be a little bit larger, require a little bit more nutrients. Following that, again, as the soil continues to change and develop as these plants die and get decomposed, you get the arrival of the softwood trees. These would be things like pine trees and fir trees. They require deep, fertile soil that can only be achieved by the decomposition of these earlier plants. And then the last one to arrive would be the hardwoods, and these would be things like oak, maple, things that require the most nutrients, so the most fertile soil that's going to be available. And when we reach this point, we reach what is called the climax community. Okay, and a climax community, the climax community is going to be very stable. Okay, usually the only thing that alters a climax community is if the climate itself change. So there's something wrong, not something wrong. The weather, there's a significant change in the temperature, humidity, the climate changes, or there's some kind of human intervention. Okay, so looking on our timeline one more time. So again, we started here with barren rock. Okay, we moved to lichen or pioneer species. Okay, from there, went to annuals and perennials. As we work our way up to the larger shrubs, the softwoods, pine trees, fir trees, and then eventually the hardwood trees, okay, where we have now reached, again, what's called that climax community, or that stable community that shouldn't really change, again, unless there's some kind of climate change or human intervention. Okay, so let's talk for a second then about the animals. So the animal population cannot survive without the plants. You have to have the plant population, the producers there, to be able to bring the energy into the ecosystem. So the animals are going to develop after the producers. And their diversity will increase as the producers increase as well. So as the plant community grows, we develop new niches for the animals. There's new places for them to live. There's new food sources available to them, okay, which in turn then is going to increase what's called my biodiversity. So the amount of species, the variety of the species that I have living in that particular area. So my animal population, like I said, is going to trail a little bit after the plant population. Your animal population really won't start moving in until around the annual time, where you bring the flowers in. And now that the flowers are there, you can start seeing maybe some small birds coming in, the insects, and the other organisms will follow behind them. But again, as you increase the plant population and increase the diversity of the plants, that opens up the doors to increase the diversity of the animals. So you get a wider variety of animals in that area because you have more niches. And so again, all of this is primary succession. I'm starting from scratch, starting from barren rock. Nothing has ever grown on this land before, starting from scratch. Now, we did mention that this climax community could be altered if there was some kind of weather change, human intervention, natural disaster, and it may need to be rebuilt. And so that's what's going to be called our secondary succession. So with secondary succession, there was things growing on that land. So it's not starting with barren rock. There was some kind of disaster. Like I said, it could be anything from fire, weather, human intervention like deforestation. So deforestation, any of these things could lead to the destruction of the original ecosystem. And so this portion here is going to be my secondary succession. I'm going to rebuild back up to that climax or stable community but I don't have to start from scratch. I don't have to start necessarily with a pioneer species. Okay, there's already some soil there, and things are just trying to regrow. Okay, so we've looked at a forest, and so let's look at what would happen with an aquatic environment. Okay, so aquatic succession, it starts with what's called a hydrosphere. So this is going to be succession. All that is succession that starts in water. And so if you look at this pond over here on the side, in 1900, this is what it looked like. And as we get to 1933, you notice this layer here that's forming on the bottom. 1966, that layer gets a little thicker. By 2000, that layer's a lot thicker. Okay, so what happens here with this hydrosphere, this succession that's occurring in the water, is first of all, we're going to have sediment deposit. Okay, sediment, silt deposit. This could be from a variety of things. Okay, it could be from the lake. Is essentially what's happening, as you can see in this picture, is that the lake is starting to fill with soil. And that soil could be washed into the lake. It could be from decaying leaves, tree limbs, dead organisms that have fallen in the lake. It doesn't matter where it came from. We're just starting to accumulate soil and silt and sediment deposit down at the bottom of the lake. It's going to have some organic material in it because some of it will come from dead organisms, decaying and dying, dead plants. Okay? And some of it will just be dirt. Okay, so as this lake continues to fill, the lake will start to run out of room. You notice you start to decrease your aquatic species that are in this lake, okay, because there's not enough room for them anymore. So from a lake, that will eventually turn into a swamp or a marshland where there's still some water present, okay, on the upper surface, but the bottom is going to be full of sediment. There's a lot of soil underneath the water. And then from there, that swamp or marsh can eventually completely dry up. So like I said, eventually, that lake could eventually dry up and disappear. Okay? And it does allow for a climax community to be built on that soil because that soil is very fertile from the dead organisms, from the decaying trees. Okay, so you've filled it with sediment, eventually become a swamp to marshland, and then eventually, like I said, it will completely dry up and allow for a climax community in that fertile soil. So we'll be looking at some differences between primary and secondary succession in the next class and getting your project going.